Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do another head-to-head, and this is quite an interesting one because it's a three-way head-to-head between John, Ringo and Paul, because within about 5 weeks of each other, back in the '73, this album came out, 29th of October, from Lennon. A couple of days later, this one from Ringo, 2nd of November, and then about a month later, this one from Paul McCartney and Wings, Bound on the Run. And at the time, it's true to say that the Lennon one rather got lost in the mix, sales-wise and reaction-wise from critics. With hindsight, I think they're a lot closer together and one can enjoy them without the context of how successful they were coming out at the time or not. And particularly since this 2002 remaster of Mind Games, it's a much more enjoyable album. One of the things that's slightly wrong with the original album for Mind Games for me was the production. Not so much the drums and the bass, but particularly the use of this female vocal choir, Something Different, who were on every track, to the detriment of every track, I'd have to say. And Lennon used this kind of chorus again on Starting Over, the comeback single in 1980, and again that was not one of that song's highlights. And one contrasts that kind of backing female group to the wonderful Beatle harmonies that he had when he was with the group, or just harmony singing with Elton John on Whatever Gets You Through the Night. I think one was missing the harmony work in Lennon's solo work for the most part. Didn't have anyone to sing harmony with. He sang a bit of harmony on Yo Yoko with Phil Spector, a bit of harmony with Elton on Walls and Bridges, and a little bit of harmony with himself on Woman and Double Fancy, and that's about it. So to make up for that, he employs this female backing chorus, and they're not very distinguished. I mean, they're quite good technically, but I just don't think they sound or add anything to the album. In fact, they detract. So that's one of the weaknesses of Mind Games. Critics tended to say it had nothing. Lennon had embarrassing little to say, and Karen Tyler, I remember saying he must learn to create events rather than reacting to them. So this was a little bit harsh, but I think he was a bit punch drunk, or whatever the phrase is. A little bit in a state of shock after the reaction to Sometime in New York City. The poor reaction, sales-wise and critics-wise. And then Nixon winning the election in '72. I think he just became he was a bit of a state of shock and was less active in the public eye, and probably didn't feel like writing anything too political because he thought he was going to get kicked out of the country. So he went back to the normal. There's a lot of love songs on this album. There's a couple of political ones, like Free to People, but for the most part it's love songs. And the highlight of this album, Mind Games, probably without question is the title track, which is one of the sublime Lennon tracks, in his top 10 of all time probably, song-wise, solo-wise. Majestic production on this track, nothing wrong with it. Not a sign of something different on this track, to its benefit. Yes, the words are a bit cliched maybe, but I think they work. And the song is quite repetitive, goes on maybe a little bit too long, but that's very minor criticism. It's a glorious track, and Tight As is a great second track, and then side one dips a bit, recovers with Free to People, and then side two has some gems on it like Intuition, Out the Blue, You Are Here, and I Know, I Know. And even Meat City on here sounds brilliant. So it's a pretty good album, but it tended to get overshadowed by, who would imagine that Ringo Starr could overshadow John Lennon, but he did, because this album is so uplifting. And it's a more enjoyable listen than Mind Games, probably. It was the nearest damn thing to a Beatles reunion. 3 Beatles on one track, and Paul McCartney featured on two other tracks. George Harrison featured on at least 3 other tracks on the album. and you got other distinguished guests such as Billy Preston, the band, Robbie Robertson and co, Nicky Hopkins, superb bit of piano by James Booker on Have You Seen My Baby, Harry Nilsson backing vocals on You're 16 Steals the Show almost, Klaus Voormann. It's the only two people who are common to these two albums are John Lennon himself and Jim Keltner, the drummer, because he plays drums on this with Ringo. It's a glorious album. It's really uplifting. I think one of the comments on my last video, that when I said Plastic Ono Band was a bit depressing, they said, well, in truth, all of Lennon's albums are depressing. Well, I don't think that's quite the case, but I see the point. But in terms of happy-go-lucky, uplifting music, who'd have thought it? Ringo, the best album of his career, his high water mark. George co-wrote two tracks and wrote one on his own. Ringo, with a little help from his friends. Delivers a masterpiece. And then, topping that, probably, McCartney, a month later, comes out with Band on the Run. And here's the UK cover, and amusingly, Denny was in the middle for the US cover. So, very happy to have both. It took me a while to find a US copy. But this is interesting because it's a renaissance for Paul, really. It's really him discovering his self-confidence again after being beaten up by the critics. Everyone talks about Ram, how brilliant it is now, but it was savaged by the critics at the time, as was Red Rose Speedway, although it topped the charts in the US. And then his drummer and his guitarist left the band, left Wings, just before they were due to go to the airport to fly to Lagos, Nigeria. So he turned up there with Linda and Denny, just the three of them. Could have sunk into a wallow of self-depression, but he didn't. He said, right, I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to make the album of my life. And the three of them, with Paul on drums, Paul and Denny sharing the guitar duties, Linda playing some keyboards along with Paul, and supplying some vocal harmonies with Denny. They made a brilliant sound. It's probably the best sounding record of McCartney's post-Beatles career, without exception, in my opinion. Just goes to show what a great drummer he is. He had drummed on the McCartney album, but here he's excelling himself. He sounds like a really natural drummer on here, and it wasn't a rushed sound like the McCartney album. He had the faithful Jeff Emerick behind the dashboard doing the engineering. So it's a very loose sound and a wonderful spirit of freedom encapsulated by the title track and the title and the cover. Whether it's a reference to the Beatles and the touring days, being on the run in the middle of this hurricane, you know, the calmest place in the hurricane is in the eye of it, or whatever the phrase is. I don't think that's quite true, but anyway. Just great confidence in the music, the melodies, the singing, and in the lyrics. He produces probably his best set of lyrics of his entire career. You compare the lyrics of Bound on the Run to the lyrics of Red Rose Speedway, and he's gone up a notch or two, to put it mildly. And although a couple of these tracks have been overplayed over the years, such as Jet and Let Me Roll It, he does them in concert maybe a little bit too often. Title track. The wonderful consistency amongst the album, with Mamounia, Bluebird, 1985 and Mrs. Vanderbilt, Picasso's Last Words, No Words. There's not a weak track on the album, there really isn't. It's a high watermark, and how often you come back to it is up to your own personal taste, I guess. But three very strong albums, and if you're going to rediscover Mind Games, I would urge you to seek out the 2002 remix, because it really is a vast improvement in my opinion. Really brings the album to life. It doesn't get rid of the backing vocals of Something Different, but in many other ways it transforms it, particularly on tracks like Meat City. So yeah, on this head-to-head, I think Ringo and Paul win the day. wouldn't like to choose between those two. They're about neck and neck, with Lennon slightly behind in this particular case. But that's what makes it fun, you know, how they fortunes ebbed and flowed throughout the solo years. Thank you for watching. See you next time.